right, welcome to another episode of A Single Window. So I'm starting you off with this rather ominous scene of an empty room, but it's all to tell a story. So this story is about a addiction program that was run, and it was a story told to me. Uh, I'm gonna try to give you an idea of what this looks like. So somebody would come into a room like this, and there'd be a bunch of people standing around the outside of the room. So how many, I'm not exactly sure, but there's quite a few, and one central one in the back of the room. So let's, I don't know, what was this going to be? This is going to be 5 people. There may or may not have been a few more. I'm not exactly sure. It's not important. Anyway, so somebody walks in, and the person with the addiction comes into the room and stands in front of the guy right here. And it's kind of just a natural thing to do, stand in front of this person. So try not to ignore the size difference and the fact that my people are all levitating around us here. But the person comes in, and it's kind of clear that there's one person that he's supposed to be talking to, which is this person. And the first thing this person asks is, what do you love more than anything else in the world? And this person, just a general normal person in the world, would typically answer something like, my children. And as soon as that was said, basically as soon as the words were done, all these people that were around the outside and just completely silent and very solemnly looking in towards the person in the center, so just quietly staring in, kind of just stoically, yeah, like I say, just watching quietly, and very proper feel to them. As soon as they said that, my children, they'd all just in unison yell, bullshit. And it would be said in that sort of forceful way I'm trying to give the impression of there. And it's this kind of cacophony around him of just that bullshit. And it kind of, the person's obviously startled by this because, I mean, it's such a forceful experience, and they're all saying it at once, and they're all very serious about saying it. So rather than really get into anything beyond that, the person in the front, still stoically, asks him again. And he says, what do you love more than anything else in the world? The person, knowing that that was obviously the wrong answer he gave last time, will kind of recalculate, and maybe he'll say something like, my mother. And this person, and again, all around the room, bullshit. In this very forceful way, they would say it. And when they said this, he'd obviously still be kind of startled, but not as much as before. And the whole idea being they keep on asking him this until finally, in tears and breaking down, the person would say alcohol. And it would, I was told that typically the experience is when they said that they loved that more than anything else in the world. It was always followed by just this release of just like horror and sadness from the person, and just be crying. And the moment that they did it, though, everybody from the outside would close in, and they would all hug the person. And this was obviously the beginning of the healing process of coming together, of coming, understanding that this was what they needed to come around, was his acknowledgement of the situation as it is. And this is not an easy thing to do for people generally, right? The reason that they can get into the situation is they would still, well, I still love my children, I still love my mother, I still love my wife more than anything else in the world, or wife or husband or whatever it is. They would say that, but it wasn't the truth, because obviously they'd given up all those things. A lot of the people that came into these sorts of programs had lost all those things because of alcohol or because of addiction. And I actually disagree that that would be the answer, that what they love more than anything else in the world would be alcohol. But alcohol is what represents what they do want more than anything else in the world. And I'll just leave that there for now. But this is an incredibly powerful program, and I'm a really big fan of some of these programs. Some of them are just absolutely brilliant, And we need to start recognizing their success and what they're doing, because a lot of it's we don't want to recognize it when it makes us uncomfortable, because a lot of these programs, the 10-step programs, have religious elements to them, and people don't like that in this day and age, and that's fine. But I think we need to inquire as people generally in a scientific way to look into them to see that they are working. And why that reason is not to just try to rob it from the spiritual element and just say that, oh, okay, well, we're taking advantage of a situation. Like, remember that person would, and again, don't think I'm giving any disrespect to the physicist, but the physicist would in love. So that's how we typically perceive these sorts of things when we look at them. As, like, you could obviously say that love is just these chemicals that we're kind of trying to induce in ourselves when we're experiencing the world, but I don't think that's exactly all of what it is, right? So I don't know if I can get rid of these one by one. No, I can't. Try to ignore that people are overlaid on this. But this little compass is here to remind me of a movie. And the movie is Pirates of the Caribbean. And we say, well, maybe it is a good thing that all these people are still here. So what we say is that we want money, and we want cars, and we want expensive trips for our family, and we want a beautiful spouse and everything else, and that's what we think we want. The compass that was in Pirates of the Caribbean pointed at what your heart wanted the most, more than anything else. All right, well, only that. And that wouldn't really seem like a treasure to us, because we think we are going after what our heart wants the most. But in reality, that's not the truth. So it's important that we look into these sorts of situations as though we maybe don't know exactly what we want. And what we thought we wanted all this time may be wrong. And what we're doing, just like the alcoholic that thinks he wants, like I say, that he said that alcohol is what he loved more than anything else in the world. It's not actually alcohol that he loves, but what he thinks alcohol gives him. And we're going to talk about these things a little bit indirectly in just a moment here. But we need to understand what these different parts of ourselves want. So this is going to be an inquiry of the brain in a way, but not necessarily exclusively. So I have this quote, one of my favorite quotes: "The brain is the most important organ in the body, according to the brain." So there's different aspects of the brain, and the brain can be interpreted in many different ways. I've went through a lot of I've had taken quite a few psychology classes and everything else, and I don't think that's the best way to look about it. I'd rather generalize rather than getting into specifics, but I want the specifics to support the generalizations, and I think everybody would say that, but it doesn't seem like anybody really does that. So the one I think is the most beneficial to look at, if we're going to try to make sense of what the brain wants, is thinking about what each part of it wants. So we've already talked about the two other sides wanting, so one more time, we want the rational side that's looking for the world to make sense, the world to be logically supported, the world to be a balanced equation, and then we have the other side that wants the world to be this beautiful, inspiring place that builds this idea of connection. But there are other elements as well to it. And the best way I think of this is the triune brain. So this is how generally they have it. So the most base part of it being the reptilian brain, which is the autonomic brain. So this is the part of our brain that runs a lot of the stuff we're not thinking about, so things like our heartbeat and regulating temperatures in our body, and what that physicist was talking about as far as and different types of reactions as far as testosterone and estrogen and dopamine and everything else. Is a lot of it's run by this part of the brain. So it's just trying to keep homeostasis in our body. The next level we'll call the limbic brain, which is the mammalian brain. So reptilian, mammalian. This one is the part of the brain that is very communally oriented. So mammals generally are creatures that take care of their young and are social animals, at least part of the time, if not most of the time. And this is sort of the emotional part of the brain. And we have to think about not only these two sides we've already talked about, but these different levels of it as well. And then the final part is everything that's left, and which is looks the biggest as far as physically the largest, but in some ways is impressive, in some ways is not. So we'll call this just the neocortex. So the neocortex is essentially exclusively a human attribute, and there's other animals that have a little bit kind of elements that are similar to this, but for now we'll just keep it like the human brain. And really what the human brain does more than anything is allow us to abstract information and to focus it towards one thing. So we see something externally through our eyes. I don't know what this is going to be. This circle, or I don't know what we call this. We'll call this a bead. We'll call it a bead like this. So a bead that is going to be through a string. We look at this and we can focus on, if we're putting the next bead on this string, we can line it up around that hole and put it back onto the necklace that we're building. And this was a process that obviously evolved throughout time. You could say that people shaping weapons, people doing stuff that is going to help them survive. It basically only allows you to like take all of your faculties and focus them on one thing, which for humans has been very important, but for the rest of the animal kingdom, I would say is not really something that they needed. So why is this important? So we got a couple of ways to sort of conceptualize this as an analogy. So if we're going to take the iceberg, this is obviously something that's been talked about by Freud, and you've probably heard of the iceberg, sort of this is the conscious part, this is the unconscious part, and the size differential is rather large. This would be the neocortex in this situation. So to me at least, let's just say that, because obviously there's some people that are going to disagree with that. But this is the part of the brain that thinks as an individual. So it's the part of the brain, or sort of coincidentally, that is above the water. And this is the person as they conceive of themselves. So that guy that was going into the AA meeting, he thought that he loved his kids more than anything else. He thought that he loved his mother. He loved a whole bunch of other things before what he actually loved. That was the neocortex talking, because that's what society says you should want. But for him, what he was trying to meet, I would say, is this, we'll call it the personal subconscious. So this is the parts of yourself that are trying to find a way to express themselves. These are repressed ideas, concepts within your mind that are all connected to who you are. This is really the culturally shaped element of yourself. And if we're looking at this as far as Freud looked at this, we'd be done now. But I want us to take a Jungian approach to this, and this doesn't end here. So you're not this individual within this medium. This medium is also important according to Jung. This would be the collective superconscious. I always do that. Conscious. We'll say consciousness, because I made that last S look so terrible. Collective superconsciousness, which is kind of a mouthful. But this is the element of which there's parts of your personal story that can't explain what you know. I should just leave it there for now. But for now, know that this is more what's generally accepted. It's just these two parts of the iceberg. And the neocortex works, can only do a few bits per second. As far as if we think of this like a computer, it's very slow, very methodical, very kind of boring. I mean, you can think of the squares as kind of boring. And the personal subconscious is sort of overly emotional, overly influenced as far as beauty and appearances, like Dimitri was, the brother that was sensualist. So this is the part of the brain, the personal subconscious, which is which is working far faster. There's a lot of bits per second working in your limbic brain, your mammal brain, and that'd be this part. So the final way we're going to kind of conceptualize this is our neocortex is like a person riding an elephant. So he knows what he wants, but if this part decides that it needs something, or it gets fearful enough that it wants to run, just like this part, it's going to run. This person's not going to stop it if it really wants to do something, right? So it can listen to this is a directing force until this part doesn't want to. And this would be like the subconscious, is this incredibly powerful part of our mind that it works quite a bit faster than this one does. But this one has the ability, like I say, to focus on one thing, usually what it wants. So let's get into some real talk here. What do all of these really want? So the not really ironic thing, but we'll say sort of coincidental. There's always a positive and negative to each of these. So the neocortex wants self-aggrandizement. So it wants to be that little person on top of the elephant that controls all this power. And it wants to see itself as number one. On the plus side, so this is the negative side, plus side, it also wants knowledge, justice. Knowledge, justice. I hope I didn't lose it again. Yeah, there we go. Knowledge, justice, and wisdom. So I think I'd love to do a video on knowledge and justice yet, but for now let's just leave it at this. So it wants something good and something bad, and these two are always fighting out. If one part of your mind gets too much control, it's going to bring the negative side of itself. It was probably brought into use in the mind because you wanted something here, but eventually these things will take over. The limbic brain, the limbic brain wants bodily pleasure, but also love, beauty, and community. So think of like an animal, like a dog, right? So it wants to eat a lot of the time. It wants what it wants when it wants it, but it also is love, beauty, and community, and definitely community if you think of a dog, right? So we have these, the negative side, we have the positive side, and these are not really positive or negative. I'm just saying this because this is how we perceive it. And what does the water reptilian want? So if we think of the iceberg, the water element, the reptilian element of the brain, what does it want? Well, it wants life. That's its main purpose. It wants a priori and nothing. So these are kind of one and the same thing. A priori is something we're going to talk about. So it's a concept put forth by a lot of philosophers. A priori is a state before what appears. So that's as much as I'll give right now, but it's important to know that there is something beyond bodily pleasure and self-aggrandizement. And this is the part that gets ignored nowadays, is because we don't believe it exists, because we can't factually, materially present it. But it's looking for this a priori, this something that is before. So this is Latin, obviously, and it's saying something that is before. So the rider of the elephant has no idea what these things are. It has no idea what's going on in the elephant's mind to beyond a certain degree. The tip of the iceberg is isolated in another world. It is divorced from its water nature. So this is another thing that fits into everything we've talked about so far. So we're talking about the left and the right before. This is talking about separate levels of the vertical. And I think there's an inversion happening here of these sort of, this is the highest part of the brain, this is the middle part of the brain, this is the lower. I think this may be an inversion of what is the a priori, but I'm giving away far too much right now. For now, that'll be enough, but this will set me up to talk about some interesting things in the future. So I hope you have a lovely day, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.